Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Chasten Remillard. I'm the program head for the Bachelor of Professional Communications, and this School of Communication and Culture is proud to present today's guest speaker, Dr. Tim Coombs, as part of our Communication Matters speaker series. Before we begin, I wanted to express that at Royal Roads University, we are grateful to the Esquimalt and Songhees families who continue to share their knowledge about the history of the lands and their cultural practices, and on which Royal Roads rests on those lands. Dr. Tim Coombs is graduated with a PhD from Purdue University in Public Affairs and Issues Management, and is a full professor in the Department of Communication at Texas A&M University. He has received the 2002 Jackson Wagner Behavioral Science Prize from the Public Relations Society of America, the 2013 Pathfinder Award from the Institute of Public Relations in recognition of his research contributions to the field and to the practice, and was the 2014 winner of the Dean's Distinguished Research Award. Today he will be presenting a talk entitled Star Wars to CSR and Team Websites, Applying Transmedia Storytelling to Strategic Communication. And I'd like to just give a big round of applause and say thanks to Tim for coming in today.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the nice introduction, and thank you for all coming out. And it's a pleasure to be here again. It's nice to go to different places, see new people, and talk about new ideas. And what I'm going to talk about today comes out of one of those trips. I was visiting in a place, and I heard someone do this presentation about transmedia. That's kind of interesting because transmedia dealt with mostly the entertainment industry. And I'm always been curious about fandom. I don't research fans and fandom, but it's a very interesting phenomenon. And I've been part of gone to some big fan type of events. You might have heard like San Diego Comic-Con, just like about 12,000 people there. But it's kind of like that, and it's like, okay, yeah, these fans and this transmedia, this is really interesting. So I was reading about it and learning more about it, but I thought, wow, so it's a really cool idea, but I didn't quite see the connection over to what I'm doing. It's like, how do I fit this into strategic communication? And then I ran across some Australian writers who were starting to say, hey, transmedia storytelling. That might be an important way for us to start thinking about how we do strategic communication and public relations efforts. And so I read some of that stuff and thought, yeah, that's interesting. I think we can do more with that. Because right now, we have a very functional sort of linear model for strategic communication and doing those types of applications. We know we do research, and from that research we do planning. And based off our planning, we communicate, and then we evaluate to see how that works. And that still is an effective way of doing things, but there are room for other ideas, and perhaps we should be thinking about these other approaches, alternative approaches to strategic communication beyond those linear ones. And when you start looking at transmedia storytelling, that can get you into more of a nonlinear format. And we'll kind of see how it's not clean. It gets kind of messy, but I think it's still a good option to have. It's available out there for people. And so what I want to do today is I want to start off by talking about what transmedia storytelling is, and then connecting it back up to strategic communication by looking at some trends that are really kind of pressuring us in this direction if you're in strategic communication, and then how transmedia helps us address those trends, and then end up with some examples looking at CSR and also with sports communication to show how this is actually being used in real life. Now, I'm not saying that the people at these organizations will call what they're doing transmedia storytelling. But it is transmedia storytelling, indicating that this can be used effectively within the strategic communication environment for it. All right, so we're going to start at the beginning, all right? So we're going to go to a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, but we know it's really not that long ago. It was 1977. That might be long for some of you before you were born. And it was just in California where really most of this was going on. But Star Wars is created, and it starts out, and it's this little movie that, maybe some people will like. Here's some of the movie posters. These are two of them. The one on the right is the Hildebrand poster. It was rarely used in the publicity for the event. And you'll notice those aren't even the actors and the actress. because they weren't sure this was going to be any good at all. But so you have over there where you actually see, you see Carrie Fisher up there, and you see Harrison Ford, and they're out there. And then you see some pictures in the background. You can see Alex Guinness. All of these guys, they went in for a percent of it because they didn't even have that much money for the film. So they said, okay, yeah, we'll be in it for a percent. You think, we're not going to get much out of this, But millions of dollars now. It comes later because, wow, this suddenly became wildly successful. People really liked this little movie that came out. And this little movie turned into more movies. And this is only 7. There are currently 10 now that are in the official part. We're going to talk about official canon here in a minute. So in the middle, we've got the one that's kind of the original one. The ones on the left side of the screen, maybe you watch them, maybe you don't. But the stuff on the right's some pretty good stuff. Empires, it holds up over time. Jedi, well, there's a little bit redundancy. How many times can you blow up a Death Star? But then you start getting into A Force Awakens. And can you name any of the ones that aren't up here? Yeah, Last Jedi, Rogue One. Yeah, and Han Solo, too. You got to count that, too. So even that there. So they're up there. And sometimes people talk about, well, this is a franchise. We've got a lot of things going on here. But it's actually more than that. There's more going on here coming out of Star Wars. And I'm going to show you an example of something. And this is like a historical artifact. This is Splinter of the Mind's Eye. This was the first full-length novelization written within what became the Star Wars universe. This has nothing to do with the movie, but it's based upon the characters. It gives you more information about the characters in terms of what's going on, and it spawns what becomes an empire in publishing, hundreds of different books that are then appearing. But Splinter of the Mind's Eye was the first one to do that. And what that indicated was this wasn't your typical franchise. This wasn't like a bunch of James Bond movies strung together. Something else is going on here with this universe in terms of what's going on. These are some of the other books. If you're into X-Wing fighter pilots, they've got a whole series up there. There's even one for Wedge Antilles, all kinds of stuff up there. And before the Han Solo part, there's a whole Han Solo series, a Lando Calrissian series. You name it, it's out there. And we'll see, it creates some problems in the end. Doesn't stop there. It goes into the comic book genre, and that's the ones out of Marvel. And also IDW, another publisher, has one that's more oriented towards a younger audience. It's out there. But these are don't call them comic books anymore. These are graphic novels. So it's a little more kind of highbrow way to think about it. So these story plots are going on. These are happening. And some of these touch in and out with the movies, but many of them are kind of out on their own in terms of the stories that they're talking about. Then there are the television shows, which are 2 cartoons. You have Clone Wars and you have Star Wars Rebels. What's interesting to see, when you start seeing fans of the Star Wars, these various things, young children tend to mostly come from the Clone Wars and some from Star Wars Rebels. Those are the characters they know and identify with because they've watched them on television. They're not as familiar with the ones you find in the motion picture industry, which is why Disney, which now owns Star Wars and also owns Marvel that makes the comic books, is now making cartoon versions of the first, I guess they're now movies 4, 5, and 6, but beginning the original movie, Empire and Return of the Jedi. Those are all going to become cartoons because those are better for young children to watch. And if you've ever been around young children, and they'll watch it again and again and again, right? And so they get very kind of caught up in all of this. But it's interesting to see how some of them come out actually from the Clone Wars. You have video games. Some of these are more sort of part of the universe than other ones. All right, Lego stuff's just kind of fun. It's kind of there. Star Wars Battlefronts, there's some interesting, it started to try to get some of the VR into that. But the one up there, The Force Unleashed 2, 1 and 2, actually was creating a new narrative and a new character that was added to the universe. This sort of apprentice of Vader's that no one had known about. So that one is truly within this kind of concept of what's going to come out and in the end look like transmedia. And you have VR. No, this is AR. This is augmented reality, where you actually can experience what it's like to be in a lightsaber duel. You also get to command troops and fight them on the ground for that. And you can get an app for your phone. Obviously, this app goes back a little bit in time because Alderaan still exists. It's giving you the weather on Alderaan. Does he know that, no more Alderaan anymore? But this is all stuff that's out there, and it's part of kind of getting people in. There's that augmented reality and selfies. Part of that is it allows you to take pictures of yourself with Star Wars characters at certain sites, like in stores that are selling Star Wars merchandise. You can go there and take your pictures there. There's all ways to kind of tie in and get people back in, and this has some various functionality to it. And then we have fan events. This is celebrations. I've been to 2 of these Star Wars celebrations, and that's why I said you can tell, like, the parents are Star Wars and the children are Clone Wars. So they're different. They have these different identities depending upon their age groups that are out there. But they're there and they're having fun, and they're sharing with one another what's going on in their universe there. And these are a real bonding experience for a lot of the fans, because if you go to these, you suddenly realize, oh, I'm not the only one. There's a lot of these other people in this world, and you get to realizing, and I'm really not as far into it as a lot of these other people are too. So I'm really kind of okay. I'm all right. I haven't gone too far over the edge. But people are dressing up, having a lot of fun, going to panels, getting inside information from the actors, but more so from actually the production side, from directors and writers telling you about the process and what's going into it. And things that you couldn't learn anywhere else. This kind of behind-the-scenes information the fans really like, and kind of see how this tie it all up as we start getting into this concept of the notion of transmedia here. And fans like to create their own content. They have Star Wars celebrations. They have a fan film competition, and fans create films based upon Star Wars. And as we'll see, you kind of still have boundaries you need to stay within, but they do their own stuff out there. Sometimes what they do is they'll pick up on a minor character and give that character a storyline. Like, oh, what was that storyline like? Someone who does that on a professional level is Seth Green, who does Robot Chicken. Seth Green will take little minor characters out of Star Wars and give them this whole kind of background type of thing. He actually created a show, and it was supposed to go to air, but Disney bought Star Wars, and they kind of put an end to his show called Star Wars Detours, but it's out there somewhere. And then here's all the kind of things that you can see that fans are doing on their own, like California Vintage Star Wars Collectors Club, cosplays of the Old Republic. So they're getting very specialized now, like, oh, well, you're the Old Republic. I'm from this movie. So you have them all. And I've seen that. You see a lot of women and young girls dressed as Rey nowadays when you're doing any of these types of events that are there. So you start seeing all this collection. So it's not just a franchise. This is a universe. And that's what Henry Jenkins is arguing, that there's something else going on here. And you got to kind of see what's going and how it involves people. So you can see films, apps, books, anthology films, TV series, comics, games. It's all going on around them. And this is what led Jenkins to the concept of transmedia storytelling. And it was all coming out through Star Wars. So he was saying that this was kind of the prototype of it all. Not that there aren't any, and we'll kind of get to that in just a moment, that there aren't others that are along this line. But this is what really kind of set the stage. I mean, if you're in a group that likes to debate between Star Trek and Star Wars, you can argue Star Trek kind of has some elements of this too, because shortly after their television show was canceled, a cartoon was created and other things have happened, but we're going to stick with Star Wars. Nothing against Star Trek as well. And this is kind of a graphic representation of what Jenkins is trying to get across with what we have going on here with transmedia. And you can see the old one is, yeah, you've got stuff out there. You've got a movie, maybe you have a game, and you have a book, but you put them all together, and it's just a mashup of stuff. It doesn't really mean anything. All right? There's not a real coherence for it. And so that leads to dissatisfaction. A good example is that someone buys a movie from the book, and all the book is the script. Well, that's not what they wanted. They wanted more than the script. They want something new, and that's one of the key elements for transmedia is each thing, it adds a little bit something new. That doesn't. They just don't connect. They don't have any sort of connection with one another. There's no type of synergy going on there. But he's saying the new world, this transmedia one, it's all going to go together. All right? When you're doing this, you've got the movie, and think movie, also television series. I'm going to want to talk. TV works very well for this as well. If you're going to create a game, how does that come in? What new information can you drop within the game that tells us more about what's going on? As I said, in the one with The Force Strikes Back, they introduce a whole new character that's not been seen in the movies that you learn about in his life. And it gives you a little bit more insight, I guess, into Vader as well, but we kind of know Vader evil kill everybody, so there's just so much. But yeah, and maybe he loved this woman in the past, but I don't know. That's what those three, it's like you just kind of know where it's going, so it's like, okay, let's just finish the three, go on to something new. And then, so this all is going to come together, and it's more than, it satisfies people better. They like this. This is again, this concept of a world, and we're going to talk about this notion of a story world becomes very important in all of this. And it brings people together, and again, ways we think we can bring this over into strategic communication. And so this is what Henry Jenkins comes up with, Transmedia Storytelling. It's a very kind of long title, but it captures it, and you're going to learn some of the jargon that Jenkins has developed for this. You just kind of bear with kind of what he's thinking. But generally what it is, you have multiple voices telling multiple stories across multiple platforms, but are unified by a story world. And what I want to do is I want to kind of walk through each of these four as a way to kind of overview transmedia and start thinking about it. You see this like, okay, I can see how this works in entertainment, but how might this come over for StratCom? Okay. Multiple voices. Various people are creating and telling stories, and each story adds new information. Now, some are going to add more information than others, but each thing is unique. And when we look through, especially the CSR effort, you'll see how there are multiple voices, and each of them are unique. All right, now the risk is, when we start having multiple voices, we can start having this kind of just fragmented issue. So you should be thinking about that right now. How do we prevent fragments? Multiple platforms. He said it's not multimedia. So it's not that I take a movie and I adapt it to a graphic novel and it looks exactly like the movie and I put it in a book and then I have a video game that plays out exactly like the movie. No, that's not it. That's multi-platform, but that's not what he's talking about here. This is more than that. The various media are used to tell the stories. So it's not just one media, using multiple media. And there's an overarching story world. And this is the key. This is the unifier. This is the overall story arc that creates consistency. So you can always come back to this story arc. And this is what comes a little bit challenging when you start moving it into StratCom, is what should we think of as our story arc here? So we have a story arc in Star Wars, and it's about Luke Skywalker and kind of where he came from and where he went, and then it gets picked up and other story arcs come in, and the larger ones. And the only really, and the consistent ones throughout there are the droids have been there throughout, watching all this and seeing what's been going on. George Lucas, when he still owned the Star Wars property, he was the one who ran it. George Lucas decided what was in the gospel of Star Wars, and they often call it canon. So what goes in the canon? And he would coordinate. So people would be writing books, and people would be developing other projects, and Lucas would see how that would all fit. Now, there was some leeway, because occasionally, you have characters, and they're in books, and they have kids, and then like, oh, well, in this other book, they don't have kids, and you get a little bit of confusion like that, but we'll see if there's ways to sort that out. In the graphic novel industry, they do that by creating alternative realities. So you have multiple realities. That's why you can have 3 different Supermen and 5 Batmans. And then at some point in time, you think, this is just too crazy, and let's have this series where we bring them all together and kill a bunch of them off and simplify our universe, which they do that every so often in DC. But Lucas was running this. Lucas was running the show, and so there was still this kind of central element to it. And then Lucas sold it to Disney, and some people were upset about that, and some people are still upset about it. But Disney comes along, but the story world, again, this is the overarching arch, and it creates this unity. So you always have a touch point to go back to, because we say, as long as we fit back to the story arc, we're okay. And that's what Lucas did, and now that's what Disney does. And we'll see, Disney likes control, all right? And so we'll see that. This is kind of a little discussion about what has happened to the Star Wars universe since Disney has purchased it. So after they purchased this, they essentially said, if it's not in the 6 existing films or the animated series Star Wars, The Clone Wars, it's legend. So, yeah, legend's probably not real. Maybe you believe in Bigfoot, maybe you don't, but that's a legend. Okay, it's out there. So that's not really now official part of the canon anymore. So the canon is the 6 films, then it goes into Clone Wars, and then they had to add on because they started adding to it. They said at the timeline there are some novels and comics in the new animated series, Star Wars Rebels. Unlike in the previous decade, all the canonical Star Wars content can be placed on a single timeline with little to no conflict of characters and plots. So that's how they're ruling out, okay, well, in this one, Han Solo has 2 children, and one of them becomes an X-Wing fighter, a female X-Wing fighter. Well, you just don't address that anymore. That's just legend. That's just kind of rumors and stuff that's out there. Here's our efficient canon for it. So they've been adding to it, the timeline, again, with some of their own novels and some of their comics. But that other stuff before, and there's a lot of other stuff before, that's just legend. That's kind of out there, but it's not part of it. But this shows you that story world matters in terms of it. And then, so they got rid of all the young adult reader, those novels, like I said, hundreds of novels that were out there. They got rid of that. And I like how they said that the Rebel comic books and Star Wars Battlefront, the video game, and DLC expansions, and any Lego adventures, as the latter 2 are non-canonical, that's lexicon, you're either in the canon or not, and the former as inconsequential as young reader books, all right? And yeah, if you've ever played the Lego games, yeah, Lego games are not canonical. They're Lego, right? You're not gaining new insights into any characters or any plots coming out of Lego. You're just having fun, busting up blocks and solving puzzles is what it amounts to. All right. So a quick summary of kind of where we're at with this. You got individual stories that are coordinated across media. So we've got a lot of stuff going on here. So even if we go back to kind of Disney's trying to reposition the world there, so we've got the set of films, we have some novels, we have some comics, so we're gonna bring that in, and we have some television shows. So we're going these different stories across these media, and the story can stand alone, but it should add something, even if it's just a small bit, to the larger story arc. It can't just be redundant. It needs to be adding to it to be really effective. And the story world provides that consistency. And for Disney now, they have this official timeline. That is their canon. They're watching it. And Disney, as an organization, is very good at control over those sorts of things. At one point in time, Lucas was probably more careful about what he was doing than later on. I mean, when you start getting into the hundreds of books and then all these graphic novels, it gets kind of crazy. And like I said, the one I showed you, like this one, this is Disney branded, so this is part of the canon now in terms of what they're doing. It's another way of kind of reaching out of audiences and telling stories that you really wouldn't want to put in film because it really wouldn't amount to a film. You still use them. So again, each story adds unique content, and also each media gives you a little bit different feel here. And we have to include in that the idea of fans and how fans get involved in it. And so there's actually in-person as one of the channels. And I want to show you that, prior to the internet, fans actually did kind of get together, but it was tougher because you had to use this thing called the mail. But this goes back, this is in the early 1980s. This is an interview Carrie Fisher did. And this was through, the newsletter was Bantha Tracks, and it was about Star Wars. And it was actually done through Lucasfilm Limited. And that's how they were trying to involve and get fans in more to it and try to bring you a different thing. Again, information you couldn't get anywhere else, right? And this predates the fact that they were having Star Wars celebrations where they would get people from around the globe to come to these events. So this was kind of the breeding ground for a lot of this in terms of what was going on for it. All right. So I have a question. TV shows. Can you think of any TV shows that can fit into this, these TV shows that are now transmedia in terms of their storytelling? Yeah.
Supernatural. There's a lot of like fan fiction out there about it.
Yeah, so Supernatural has quite a following. They're up there in terms of the cult ones. And a lot of these are, we now would call them kind of cult followings. Yeah.
X-Men, they started off with the movies, now they are in the TV shows as well. If you know, there's a New Mutant series that's going on about right now. They have cartoon shows as well. There's a lot of toys as well in the market for the same.
Yeah, and that's one of the points.
Itself, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the kind of points that gets debated in transmedia is, do action figures count? Because they'll say, oh, action figures count because people, the children play with them and do all this kind of stuff. Or is it just adults who are collecting them? Now, those are some good examples. I want to include just one example from a television show, in part because its unique nature of its fandom, but one that's actually filmed in not one of the glamour spots in Canada. And like people like to shoot in Toronto and Vancouver. This one's not. You may have heard of this little television show called Wynonna Earp. It's shown on the Sci-Fi Network, but it's actually a Canadian production. Most people on it are Canadians for it. It's about a descendant of Wyatt Earp, modern day one. It's got Wyatt Earp's gun, and she has to go around and she has to kill demons. It's kind of an odd kind of idea, but where did Wynonna Earp's idea came from? Well, the showrunner for it, Emily Andrus, was given a copy of a graphic novel called Wynonna Earp and asked, hey, can you do anything with this? And she did. She turned it into a show. And now there are other comics coming out of that. This is not your typical Wynonna Earp comic. The typical Wynonna Earp comic has stereotypical how men draw women in comics, all right? This is the cast members. So Tim Rosen, who plays Doc Holliday, he actually helps write it. Bo Smith created this series, the comic book that it was based upon, and Rosen and some other people have been involved in writing it. And many of the actors have actually contributed, so you're getting multiple voices, different voices coming in and writing about it with the show. And Wynonna Earp, for a small show on Sci-Fi, it's attracted a lot of fan interest. And they had just last year, this was Akon. That's out in Canada. Ghost River Country, Ghost River Triangle is kind of where the demons are. And they're bounded, they can't leave the Ghost River Triangle, and that's where Wynonna and her friends killed them. And so this was part of it. There's a convention in Canada, there's one in the US, and there's even one in the UK. So this show very quickly did it, and it's because it has a very unique fandom to it. Wynonna Earp's fandom centers a lot around concerns about the LGBTQ community because they have some characters in it who are gay and lesbian in it. And as a result of that, there's this social support network that's formed out of the fandom that's rather unique. A lot of fandoms, it's about, well, no, you misunderstand this character and fighting about that type of stuff, or which one was the best Star Wars movie. But the Wynonna Earp one is very much about social support, and particularly for young people who are coming out, they find this as a very useful kind of network and support group that they find through it. So it's a very unique fandom. But it's all though built around the story world of a descendant of Wyatt Earp killing demons. But it's kind of meant other things because they've got into, and part of their, you could argue one of their arcs within their large story arcs is inclusion and acceptance, because they're a real band of misfits who come together and view themselves as a family in the end of it. It's a very different type of show. If you like to see people with guns killing demons, seasons 1 and 2 are really good for that. They're going in a new direction. Not quite sure what they're going to do in the next season because the gun's not being used. It's a long story about what happened to the gun, so I won't talk about that. All right. So we can ask ourselves, why should we bother? This transmedia stuff's interesting, but do we really need it? And I would argue, yes, we do, because there are some trends, and I'd say some pressures that are going on in strategic communication that's challenging how we think about it and how we do our work. And I think this is important to know. So I think it's more than a curiosity, and I want to kind of walk through these 4 pressures I think all kind of help to push us towards thinking about this as one way of doing strategic communication. Again, not the only way, because I don't think this fits for everything you're trying to do in StratCom, but it does have some very useful applications. Like I said, we're going to look at some stuff at CSR and also some stuff out of SportsCom for it. But start off with digitization. And digitization is interesting. We get caught up in the platforms, and that's over here, the social media platforms. And there's, they're always creating new platforms, and organizations trying to figure out how do we use these platforms. Whatever comes along, they want to know how can we use this? How can we use this? Well, that's great, but the only reason we're concerned so much about these platforms are the digital naturals. The digital naturals are people like you all who use social media and who use these platforms. If you had these platforms and no one was really interested in them and using them, then they're worthless. All right? It's the digital naturals. These are the people who have varying levels of skill, but a desire and a willingness to be in there and using social media. And as a result of that, it's really kind of changing what's going on. And we get to the SportsCom part of it, huge deal for fans, the social media part of it. Corporations less so, because you don't really have fans of corporations unless you're Lego, but even then, Lego fans are still not the same quality of other fans. And it's great that certain people specialize in collecting yellow bricks, but how much can you do with that if you're Lego? There's only so much that works out of that. Storytelling. Storytelling has a long history. Storytelling is the history of civilization. There are oral cultures. So there's some cultures that are still oral in nature in the stories that they tell about it. If you look at typically, indigenous populations will have these strong oral traditions, and they'll tell these stories. Like, yeah, that's part of it. And when you're young, you get told stories. You're told bedtime stories. So we have this natural inclination towards liking stories. And this has been talked about for years in StratCom. Like, hey, we should be storytellers. And you see a lot more people, oh, we're storytellers. So am I a PR person? No, I'm a storyteller. It's like, okay, great. But what's your story? What is your story that you're telling? That's what I was always pressing. It's like we're storytellers. Like, okay, so tell me your story. And it'll be like, that's a commercial. Is that necessarily a story? I'm not sure. But we got to think about what it means to be a story. Stakeholder engagement. This is big. The problem is it's really hard to define. Because stakeholder engagement can mean many things. But what it boils down to is you're kind of looking at an interaction between the stakeholders and the organization, but you also have stakeholders interacting with each other, but it's got to come back to an engagement with the organization. And we keep being told this is what we need. You need to engage your stakeholders. Particularly in CSR, you're told you got to go out and engage them. It's like, all right, well, what does that really mean? Is a like on social media engagement? Yeah, that's one measure, but what does that really tell us? We need to think, how do we really engage them? Because really, engagement is a route to the last point here, and that's the idea of co-creating meaning. And how do we share meaning between the stakeholders and the organization? And this is a notion that communication is socially constructed. Right? Through communication, we socially construct meaning around events. And this involves how your stakeholders are going to interpret your messages and how your stakeholders are going to interpret your actions. You can look around on any given week and you find organizations that thought, oh, hey, this is a great idea. They float it out there and their stakeholders are like, oh no, what are you doing? That's just horrible. Why are you doing that racist and offensive messaging that you've just sent out? You're like, oh, we didn't see that. Right? That's part of the co-creation of meaning that goes on for it. And we know that, yeah, we all see the world slightly differently, yet we have overlap, and that overlap allows us to get along and to kind of share meanings with one another. So when you talk about co-creation of meaning, you're not like, oh, we have this very precise meaning. We've been arguing that really co-creation of meaning is about valence. That when we all look at something, do we agree that that's good? All right, so we share valence. We've co-created meaning. This is good. Now, we probably have different reasons why we think that's good. And that's all right, as long as we're all together on it. And that goes back to some of the early ideas of organizing principles for organizations that, maybe we're not all in this organization for the same reason, but we all are going to share and kind of work towards the operation of the organization. So it goes back a little bit to some of those ideas. And think about co-creation of meaning around a reputation or CSR action. Is that good or is that bad? A few years ago, Starbucks thought it had this great idea that it was going to initiate this discussion about race in America. And how did that go bad? I was at a meeting where, this was prior to the launch, a few months before, and the chief communication officer from Starbucks was in and goes, oh, we've got something on the horizon that's really good. You're going to be so impressed when you see this, like really kind of selling it up. That's what it was. And it's like, oh, wow, that didn't work. Co-creation wasn't there. And that's you kind of have to see what's going on with that. So we've got to have this idea that, yeah, we at least all think it's good. And now is the case where too many other stakeholders thought, no, not good. You're a coffee company. What are you doing initiating discussion of race? So they've gone in some other directions. I think more successful ones, P&G did it. It's Like a Girl campaign. That was very effective. They did a lot of messaging across various platforms and got, kind of this co-creation of meaning. Of course, it meant different things to different people a little bit, but about, what they're actually talking about, like a girl, and they applied it to different areas. And they actually encouraged people to bring in their own interpretations of that. But it was all this idea, well, let's take that term, which is often viewed negatively, and turn it into a positive. And they use it for a discussion and a framework for it. That worked, all right, because there was a shared valence that actually was fairly positive. Overall, I would say what we're seeing here is the difference between something being integrated into what you're doing and an add-on. And I'm going to use an example of textbooks. All right? When textbooks come out, they need to be revised. And for Stratcom books, social media created a lot of need for revision. Right? Well, a lot of times what happens, it just gets added on. So, okay, I'm gonna mention Twitter in 3 chapters, or I'm going to have one section about it. That's all well and good, but that's not integrated. That's an add-on. And integration says, I'm going to go back and I'm going to rethink how I wrote this book, and I'm going to integrate it into the various chapters and how this works. That's integration. And it's a difference also on a more technical term between digitizing and digitization. Digitizing means I know how to put something digital. Digitization means I've integrated digital into the way I'm thinking and approaching stuff. And I think that's what these trends are. These are pressures for us to rethink using just the linear model, the different ways we can start thinking about how we go about doing strategic communication and really kind of getting in and engaging our stakeholders. And so as we dig deeper into this, I want to go a little bit through these kind of 7 principles that we have for it. And just to kind of give you, this is a little bit of the language, kind of what they're talking about here. Kind of see where we're going, you'll kind of see how these things are going to lead to engagement and co-creation. It's going out there. I'm going to walk through some of these ideas, but essentially these are the 7 principles Jenkins developed, and they're different kind of fan effects and story construction. And I want to start off talking about fans, because that's the interesting part, because the fans are stakeholders, and how do we get them to engage? Fans want to engage, so how do you get stakeholders to want to engage? Because a lot of your stakeholders don't want to engage. Think about it. Like, you might be fans of a sports team, right? And that's really exciting, and you follow it. And so every day, when your team wins or loses, you feel that. As an organization, do you check the news every day to see how they're doing? It's like, oh, wow, General Electric had a bad day. I feel really bad. It's like, no, it's not the same, But your team loses, that's going to be different. All right, so talk about this fan effects. He talks about spreadability and drillability. And spreadability means fans are going to take this content and they're going to share it with other people. They're going to share it throughout their networks. All right? That's why we're saying that engagement isn't just you and the organization, it's the stakeholders with one another. And ideally, that's what you want as an organization. You can call it viral, but this is spreadability he's talking about here. They're going to react to it. There's also drillability. You like this story. You want more information. You're going to go looking for it. And that's what we keep saying. Oh, our stakeholders are active seekers of information. Sometimes. A lot of times they're not. Think about yourself. How many times are you really motivated to go find information about an organization? But when you are, that's drillability. You want to go into more about it. So the idea is, like, yeah, that's what a good story world does for you. You can kind of bring those points out. You have immersion and extractability. Immersion, you want to be part of the story world. All right? You can go to theme parks, conventions, you can do live action role playing. Okay, that's kind of going. We can see that with Star Wars. Star Wars, you can go in, you can do the augmented reality. By the end of this year, you can go to California, to Orlando, and you can be part of Star Wars lands that they're going to have created in each of those ones. And yeah, there's probably someone right now live action playing Star Wars somewhere. But yeah, you want to be a part of it. And so in StratCom, we're not going to have theme parks or conventions, but people want to be a part of it. They want to get involved in it. And again, I think you saw part of that immersion part with the Like a Girl campaign. Extractability. Fans take information about this and they apply it to their own lives. There are places where Jedi is really a religion. It's recognized as a religion, because that's taking kind of lessons out of that. One of the very powerful things of Like a Girl campaign is they were taking lessons away from it. People could see how this might apply to their lives. As we start thinking about CSR, that's a really good route. We want to be able to go about that. This is the key, though, to it all, and it's this concept of performance. Performance means fans are encouraged to get into the action. And if we're going to engage stakeholders, if we're going to co-create meaning with stakeholders, we got to get them to perform. They got to be a part of it. They can't just be maybe seeing us in social media or completely ignoring us. We have to get them involved. And these are the two terms here, a cultural attractor. Your story draws people in. So your CSR messaging brings people in. They want to know more about it. Cultural activators, they are doing things. They're going to share meaning. They're going to give the community something to do. You want to bring them out. We see this in conventions. That's a part of it. But you don't need that. You also see it online as people kind of come to these ideas and start sharing them more. And again, I want to give some examples of that as we start looking through actual applications of it. But this is the key. You need to be able to create content that is a cultural attractor and a cultural activator, because that's going to get you to the point of engagement and co-creation of meaning. And you're naturally going to do it, include digital as a part of it, and it's going to be part of a story. So you're taking all those trends and you're kind of bringing them together. However, the challenge is going to be for you, as you start looking at this, transmedia is the ability to draw people into the story world, but you got to create that story world, all right? Multiple channels, different access points. People are going to pick up on different things. Maybe someone's like really interested and they pick up stuff through Twitter. Others are going to see it on YouTube and come in through that. There's the various channels. It's the way that different people come at Star Wars. Some of them may only just read the books. Some of them see the movies. Some watch the cartoons. Different entry points. You want different ways for people to come in to kind of be a part of that. You just don't want it on one platform. That doesn't work. That's not enough. And story construction, this is tough. Okay, you got to now create some interesting stuff. All right? You've got to create a story world that people are going to want into there. And it has to be one that is amenable to multiple perspectives. How are we going to bring that in? How are we going to let multiple voices come out? Different perspectives, but unified. Wow, that's really challenges managers. It's like, okay, there's different people talking, and I can't control what they're saying, and maybe it has to go in a direction I didn't want. Got to accept that. This is going to be part of it. World building. You can handle multiple stories. It's not just one shot, and that's it. And there's seriality. A story can have many parts. So you want to look at ways of kind of working in, bringing things together. So kind of how all that gets together. That's going to be challenging to create, though, because you need to be thinking about your content differently. We're usually thinking of a linear action that's pretty one step goes here. Now we're not. We're talking about an action that can go in multiple directions at any time, and one that's going to float and meaning may change, and you need to be able to adapt to that. If your stakeholders see it as positive but start taking it in a direction you didn't intend, you need to be willing to go in that direction with them. So, okay, yeah, let's embrace that. That's not what I thought, but let's go with that. And so that's why it's not linear. There are many branches going on in times. It can be kind of frustrating for it. Because you have this tension, this fragmentation versus unity. That's a concern that kind of drives people. It's out there. Okay, storytelling. This is a little bit about storytelling and affecting the brain. Just know that Yeah, we like stories, all right? This is kind of trying to break it down into what it means scientifically, but we all kind of know we like stories. So again, it's the ability to draw people into the story world, because if you don't draw people into the story world, it doesn't work. All right? And so the power of the story world, it's this richness, these multiple stories across all these platforms. There's a lot out there for different people to do, and they can immerse themselves. So I can encounter it in different ways, and when I find one, I can get more information over here if I want. I can go through that. And it's opportunities for people to engage. And this is what scares a lot of managers, because when you say, oh, I'm going to let people engage with my messages, sometimes that doesn't go well for you. Well, it doesn't go well for you when you try and control it. So you put out a campaign on Twitter saying, tell me the reasons why you love my company. Well, you kind of know what's going to happen, right? Some people are going to take that hashtag and they're going to write some really, like, when I had this product, it made me sick. You're going to have this type of stuff out there. You can't have that preconceived notion of that I have this point I need to get to. You got to say, all right, we're going to go. We might go left, we might go right, but we're going to go somewhere with this. All right? You have to be willing to go along for the ride, and that's a scary thought a lot of the times. Because with all these pressure to changes, as we start integrating them, the huge wild card are your stakeholders. So these fans, as they start to engage with you and co-create meaning with you, you're not quite sure what's going to happen with all of this. You know, sometimes you wind up like Starbucks, and it's like, oh wow, this is a horrible situation. Let's dump this, and let's kind of get out of it. And other times it's not quite what you wanted, but hey, this is working out pretty good. Procter & Gamble, another campaign they run is the Moms campaign, and they do it around every Olympic Games, where they talk about the mothers who supported the athletes, and the athletes talk about their mothers, and the mothers talk about it, and it's a chance for them to talk about these various issues. And that's very powerful, but each time it's different, it's unique. It depends upon who the athletes are and what they talk about with their mothers and that relationship. And then as people start reacting to that, the fans start reacting to it and adding their stories, it can go in different directions. But it's still this overall compelling story arc of the mothers that really kind of draws people in to the situations going on out there. Now, there is a little bit of theory behind this too, and it's narrative transportation theory that's out there. And that's the idea that when you get involved in a story, it transports you and can change you in various ways. And I'll just talk a little bit about it, and kind of want to get to the examples here. But the idea is there's a story, the story transports you, you kind of lose yourself in the story. It's not that you lose touch with reality, but you just get involved in the story. And then those feelings from the stories then can be conveyed out to others. So the idea is if I'm an organization, I tell this really brilliant story about my organization's creation and my reputation, you really love that story, it really kind of moves you, that will then convey a positive emotion about the reputation of my organization. So it'll transfer over there. And that's kind of the theory that lies behind it for all of it. But now how do we translate this? Well, a key point is how do we figure out what is a story world? And because that's going to set the rules. For public relations, arguing that the larger organizational goals form the story world. It's important in strategic communication we never lose sight of the fact that it's not, our communication is not about our department. Our communication is about our organization. That we are doing strategic communication to help achieve larger organizational goals. If you're in a nonprofit, it's about how you're going to serve a society. If you're in a corporation, it's going to come down a lot of times to profit and kind of financial issues for it. But this is a very instrumental view of strategic communication, but that's very appropriate. And so you have these larger organizational goals. That can be your story arc in terms of what you are. And one of the best ways this is applied is through CSR, because CSR, you can create these kind of arcs. What is my organization about? And we'll kind of walk through some examples to kind of illustrate that. Because P&G, the mothers, that was a story arc. Why are they talking about mothers? Who's the primary purchaser for P&G products? Yeah, they're mothers. And someone complained like, well, why aren't you talking about dads? And they very quickly were shut down by stakeholders saying, just go away. All right, it's like you clearly don't understand what's going on here. And one of the reasons it's so useful when we start talking about CSR is CSR has this catch-22 that you only get a benefit from CSR when your stakeholders know about it. And stakeholders say they want to know about your CSR, but when you tell them about your CSR, it often creates a backlash, and they're mad, particularly if you advertise about it. It's like, well, why are you spending money on advertising? You could be spending it on society and CSR. Well, this whole idea of, well, if we go digitization and we start talking story worlds, we can kind of get around some of that catch-22, because we're not in an advertising, and we're really not talking about our company being great and doing CSR. We're talking about the action itself and its impact upon stakeholders. I think that's what P&G sees. P&G sees when we do this CSR and we communicate, it's not about P&G. It's not about P&G. It's about you and how these issues affect you as stakeholders. And let's see if we can't help you or other stakeholders help you with these sorts of issues. I think that's a very important aspect of it. So if we look at this application in CSR, I'm going to start off with a little bit more successful effort that Starbucks had. And this was Starbucks and their upstanders. And this was, Starbucks has always wanted to reach out and engage and get their stakeholders involved. And they've tried different things. And an upholder is a person who acts to make positive change. And this is now in its second generation. They've had, the first one, I think they had 14 films, and now they're adding these new films to it. It's all under a story arc of societal enrichment, because that's what they're talking about. You're trying to make a social change to enrich society in some way. What does social enrichment mean? It can mean different things to different people. But we're going to agree that that's a good thing. Again, that's that valence notion. So we're going to co-create meaning. This is a good thing. Exactly what? We're not sure. And we can have multiple voices. The initial 14 were 14 different people who were upstanders. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of what they did along the way with that. This is a little bit about the background. You know, Howard Schultz, before he started talking about maybe running for president, crazy businessmen in the U.S. want to be president. And they also brought in an award-winning writer from the Washington Post and started creating this. And you see it's available across platforms. Like you can get it on Amazon, all kinds of stuff is out there. But originally it was just on the websites as they started adding and kind of spreading out there. Now, what's missing from that is you got to see that there's actually more going on to that. There are these voices. So, okay, if we start with just the 14 original ones, so there's 14 voices in that. And the article that I showed you was a bit misleading that, yeah, Schultz and the writer did write some about it, but they didn't write the stories. The stories are the person's story. And the person telling the story and the people involved with that person in that societal change telling the story. And this is where we start using a term that when I first heard it, I thought, oh, wow, this is another one of those stupid terms. It's just a buzzword. But the more I think about it, the more, yeah, I guess really it works. You curate. You curate content. You're like a museum curator. You don't make the paintings, but you arrange them and pick them and show them. And that's a lot of what you now have to do. You don't just create content, you curate content. You have to be willing to do that. So you had the officials, you had the stakeholders, multiple channels. These were on YouTube. They did podcasts with this. I think it's pronounced Fotion. It's another kind of platform for sharing pictures, all right? And they did town hall meetings, so they actually had it in person. But in terms of the Fotion part, what they did is they said, hey, what are you doing? What makes you an upstander? You know, and people could press their stuff. They also allowed people to nominate others for future movies for it, so people could add their own views in it. So they weren't quite sure where that would go, but they were allowing people to do it. But that's the way to generate then their next generation of films were based probably in large part of what they heard from people saying, hey, this is a person I know, and this is what they're doing. So you're getting the multiple voices, you're getting multiple platforms, but it's still this overall arching of, you know, this idea of the idea of societal enrichment that's going through it. Again, people are sharing these messages. Yes, they are. They're going on and they're sharing it across there. They're applying the lessons to their own lives. We see people talking about that. And these messages, they are cultural attractors, these films, and they are cultural activators. So people are interested, they're going into the content. And as a result of that content, they are doing things. They are then encouraged to join and try to find efforts in their own society where they can try and make changes in terms of what's going on. They did engage their stakeholders around this idea of improving society. This worked. People did get engaged. Now, did they have tens of thousands of their customers? No. But they actually did attract people who were interested in it. When you're talking about, again, when you talk about corporations, you don't have these huge fan bases, but you have stakeholders, and if you can engage them, that's great. You're not going to be looking at tens, hundreds of thousands. That's all right. And so they are shaping the content with their contributions. So that you kind of start it out, and then it's got to go on its own. You can use the term organic if you want. You got to let it go, as long as this kind of fits with the story arc. And this is curation by Starbucks. They're curating the content. They're not creating the content they didn't write the stories. The individuals wrote the stories. They went out and filmed, and they're helping promote them. But it's these people's stories. Again, so it's not about Starbucks, it's about the upstanders. The same way P&G makes it about the stakeholders and what the stakeholders' concerns are with that. And right now, P&G is doing that again. They're teaming up with National Geographic. This was just released last week. That it's going to be about extreme global poverty and inequity, sustainability. That's kind of their the big story arc that's going on there. It's going to be a storytelling partnership, right? 6-part documentary series. It's going to be a National Geographic. And in addition to that, they're going to be using a lot of different platforms. They're going to customize episodes. They're going to have custom digital articles and social media moments, of course, for your brands, if you're P&G. Tide, Always, Charmin, and Head & Shoulders. And this is all going to be part of that. All right? So we are going to see multiple voices. We're seeing multiple media, multiple stories, but kind of unified across this theme. And we'll see how much of this is probably, again, it's going to rely upon curation by both National Geographic and by P&G to kind of get this done. But this is, again, this is just a brand new thing that's been released. All right? So that's CSR. I think it works very well in CSR because CSR really is a story. You can have these larger values that arc above you to kind of bring in a lot of ideas. And if you really want to take seriously engagement and co-creating a meeting in your CSR, this is the way to do it, other than just like sending out a sustainability report that says this is what we did and look how much energy we saved. Yeah, that's great, but that's not really going to engage your stakeholders in a way. All right. Application of sports communication. This is kind of a fun part because this is where the fans emerge. All right. Sports is a completely unique industry with the fan and the fan fervor that they have there because fans want engagement. Fans are out there engaging whether you engage them or not. They're engaging with each other, not always pleasantly. And it can get very ugly out there. But I want to talk about AS Roma. AS Roma, the Serie A, top league in the Italian football. But they're seeing that their social media is just not working, particularly their website. They know the fans are out there, but they're not on their website. They're just not connecting there. And so entered in Paul Rogers. He's not the Paul Rogers who was a singer. He's just a Paul Rogers who did social media. He came over from Liverpool, where he'd been doing social media. And he comes in and he decides, we're going to do this differently. All right? That too often we ignore the fan. And we don't bring the fan in. And he wanted to take this seriously in terms of it. And so here's a little bit of what they did. They went on, they did Reddit, they did forums, and they did Twitters. And they asked fans, what's wrong? What are we not doing right? How can we improve? So they started out with that. And from this feedback, they started to construct their new website. And this is in their own words, it's born that fans love a lot. Traffic increased considerably. In 2017, they won Best Sports Website of the Year. So they have some success behind them. But their starting point was, what do the fans want? We need to be thinking of a different model. And this is overall, we know some general trends in sports communication is that we know on the consumption side, it has switched from a network showing you something and you having to watch it when the network showed it, to now lots of different ways for you to watch and view sports, and you control the consumption, your time, when you do it, what type of device you use. It's really kind of a change to fan. And that's what was lacking here, is that Roma realized fans don't feel any ownership. They don't feel a part of this website at all. So kind of how do we do that? And because we want to engage the fans. And engagement is very critical because engagement is directly translatable into revenue issues for your team. Essentially, any pro team has 4 sources of revenue, and 2 are closely related to this. One is sponsorship money, and the second one is the sale of merchandise. If I can get fans engaged, they're probably more likely to start buying stuff. But more important than that, if I can show high levels of fan engagement, not only do you like it, but you're posting comments and you are sharing it. Those last 2 are important. I mean, you can think about this. The easiest thing to do is press like. Okay, yeah, so you're engaged, but you only press like. I'm gonna share it. Well, I'm willing to now put my name on it. I'm gonna share it along, and I'm gonna get increased reach. That's great. Comment. I actually take the time that it takes to type out something, so that's even more important. So you can think about those in terms of weightedness. But if I'm a team, one of the things that I'm going to attract with my sponsors is, okay, sponsors, let's incorporate you into my digital life. And the sponsors are going to ask, what do I get out of this? How do I know that the people I want are out there? And you can have a breakdown about, like in your media, who's watching what. And we know that, for instance, both Facebook and Twitter are really great for sports fans, especially for people who like football. And what you need to be thinking about is that has a monetary term. As your engagement increases, your value to the sponsor increases. And the sponsor understands that. There's a direct relationship there. So when you just start gooding and you look at, okay, are you able to increase your engagement stats? And again, common engagement stats are likes, retweets, comments. That can translate into revenue for you as an organization. That's meaningful. That's where your data comes out for social media. All right, so they said, let's not just talk about getting fans involved, but actually involve them in communication. And this is where Roma started thinking about different ways they could do that. And so again, there was this disconnect from what the fans wanted and what the teams give. This is a common problem in strategic communication. It's a lack of research. Oh, I know what my stakeholders want. No, you don't. Most of the time you don't. It's sad, but companies can't assume this. You need to ask them, what do you really like? Because if Starbucks has asked, maybe they figure out, oh yeah, let's not do that thing about race. We'll stay away from that one. Digital fans are not passive. They want to be there. They're out there. They're around. Because fans are out there. They're creating their own websites. They're creating their own blogs. They're out there. They have podcasts, other social media platforms. Every team around there has all kinds of issues that are floating around. Recently, the Chelsea football team, when a bunch of their 14 different fan groups got together to help them address kind of one of their lingering race issues that they have with the Chelsea team. Those were all fans. Fan created a lot of that stuff that's going on that. And so the idea here was, well, let's bring in fan content. And that's what Roma did. So they went from a model of this is us as the content creators to we're content creators, but we're also content curators. We're going to bring in your content, all right? Your photographs from the match, we're going to bring that in. Now keep in mind, you have the website and then multiple languages and all kinds of platforms. You can lose track of it after a while. Have them written features by the fans. Bring in a fan. Talk about their love of the game. Why do they love Roma? How do they feel about the team? Opinion columns, graphic design work, artwork that fans create. All this can be incorporated in. So you're encouraging fans to bring it in. Now, of course, you're going to curate because you're going to like, ooh, well, that's just really inappropriate. You don't want that content on there, right? Which is a real danger if you ever do a live feed of your Twitter and encourage people to saying things on Twitter. Make sure your language filter works. Ask Starbucks about that. They had a failure of a language filter that led to a lot of profane words appearing behind children ice skating at a Christmas rink in London. And also Skittles tried that and went horribly bad because they had no filter and people just posted whatever they wanted. And that Twitter feed was like on the home page for Skittles. Don't do that. That's a bad idea. There needs to be filters because there's some people who just want to have some fun out there, and it could be at your expense. What's going on out there? And here's, Roger's talking about, can we please everybody? Possibly not, but we believe the approach we've taken gives us a better chance of success and is more likely to come closer to satisfying the ever-changing demands of our existing and future global fan base. They have multiple languages because this is a global team, and it's quite obvious by the fact that they both have a WeChat and a Weibo accounts for the team as well. They're looking global reach. Asia is a huge growing market base, particularly China, for football. This is just one simple example they use, and they have the fans vote on the man of the match. Just a little bit of involvement, not anything too unusual, but at least you're getting the fans involved in this. They have their say in terms of what's going on. And you can think about extending this by using, some teams have used both augmented reality and virtual reality to find ways to put their fans like actually inside the game. You kind of experience what it's like to be on the field and going through things. And that usually then will result in some type of either video or still images that people can then share with it, kind of, again, trying to get them involved and being a part of that. So it's trying to get them part of your world in football. And so the larger story world is just really kind of about, we love Roma, sort of an idea here. But it's another way that we can kind of approach to think about how do we want to bring people in and telling the stories in different ways that are out there. And this is kind of the measure of success. I mean, they've been highly successful at it, and this was in whether you're 2018, 2016, 2017, the metrics are there for them. They're seeing a lot more engagement with that. And as I said, that's actually going to translate over into revenue for the team as well as a part of it. So there's important considerations of it. And that's how we think about engagement. We got to think about how do we let the fans also tell their stories so their voices are out there using these multiple platforms and various things. Again, just keeping in mind it's about kind of Roma and the love of the team. It's easier to do for teams than it is for organizations. That's why I say for organizations, I think CSR is probably a pretty safer route that we have there. So what I've tried to do today is kind of introduce you to Transmedia Storytelling if you didn't already know about it, and then identify kind of some of the trends and pressures in StratCom that's kind of pushing us towards that direction, to think more beyond just our typical linear approach as to how we might use transmedia to create a more sort of, in a haphazard and a good sense of way. Things that are multiple ideas going on and trying to come back in to what's going on for it. And just to kind of keep in mind that as we start thinking about how we enter and use the digital world, that it is important to think that you're not just a content creator, but you're also a content curator. And I think one way of kind of looking at and working with curation, and it's effective in some areas of strategic communication, will be this transmedia approach and this transmedia storytelling that's there. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Lego and as an organization, Lego really transformed themselves by becoming digitized and going into computer games and linking with Star Wars. And so they changed the way kids interact with Lego and really became more successful because of it.
Yeah, there's if you haven't seen it, we have too many. It's either Amazon or Netflix. They have a series. It's about toys, and the one about Lego is really good to see what they did. They were a company. They were almost gone. They almost went out of existence. But how they came back, and it was coming back to these fans, and how do we get involved? How do we lead them? Yeah, they get into this other world for it. Yeah, I think you're right. Lego is a great case to look at, see how companies think about how it's interacting with the stakeholders. They just kind of lost direction, and it's easy to do because your stakeholders aren't stagnant. They change over time. Kids playing with Legos today are not the kids who were playing with their first traditional set was like this city, although they have kind of brought that back, this classic city set. But there was other things like adding in motion and that type of stuff. And they look in terms of what they are. They're very much in touch with their fans now. terms of what they're looking for and what they want. And more companies should probably do that, think about that. That's the newer version. Because the old plan was, if I make something great, people will want it. But nowadays you want to figure out, well, what do people want? And then I need to kind of go in that direction for it. I mean, Apple still kind of holds that to like, well, I'll make something fantastic and people will buy it. And it's still working for them, right, to a degree. They're trying to figure out, what people need.
Thanks so much for that great presentation. I think I was involved in transmedia storytelling as a kid with my Josie and the Pussycats fan club that I signed up for at the back of my comic, and I did get a doll. But we've come a long way, and there was no digital back then. Mm-hmm. I was thinking while I was listening to what you're saying, you're comparing like the sport world to more of a corporate organization. Have you seen any political strategic communication that has used story? Or would that just be too dangerous?
No, that's good. I think there's a lot of political ads that really are stories. They're the stories about who is the politician, and that's kind of how you build your characters, through the stories that you tell. Unfortunately, too often, in the United States, so we get our attack ads. So those are not, when you go and just attack your opponent, that doesn't give us anything. An example of that, I lived in Illinois when Obama ran for Senate. And Obama, when he ran for Senate, all of his ads were about, this is who I am, and this is what I've done, and this is what I want to do for you. It was his story. And it was kind of like, if these are the values you want, and you want to vote for me. He didn't even mention his opponent. Of course, his initial opponent had to withdraw because his wife, who was an actress, filed for divorce, and those divorce papers indicated that when they were in France, he wanted to hire a prostitute for him and his wife, and she wasn't too keen on that, and he kind of had to then drop out of the race. And then he had a replacement person for it. But for whatever reason, Obama ran one on, this is who I am. And I think that story gets appealing to people. They want to know that.
The involvement of the public.
You don't see that as much, but that's something that should probably be done, because they always are message testing and doing all kinds of stuff on that. Well, what do your stakeholders want to know about? They're too often, I think they just get too focused on the attack part of it and not kind of back to what people want. Because they assume that people say, oh, we want information about policies, and you give them policy information, they tune you out. Well, maybe you didn't do it in the right way. What are people saying? Probably the closest we get to that is when they like to do this in State of the Union speeches in the U.S., is they bring in people and their stories, like, oh, here's so-and-so from this state, and this is what she did, and this type of stuff. That gets to it, but that's kind of your non-campaign rhetoric. Unfortunately, in the U.S., the advertising has just gone too negative, I think. So they're kind of missing that component.
Thanks, Tim. That was amazing. And as you were talking, I was thinking internal communications might also be an avenue where you could have this, because your stakeholders are then much more capable of adding to that story.
Yeah.
And then while Virginia asked the question, I was thinking about Obama's Yes We Can, which sort of did take on the kind of multimedia, or transmedia. You had Will I Am with videos, and you had Obama Girl, and you had, you sort of had pop art show up, and it kind of had this kind of iconic pop kind of vibe to it, the first election that he ran. So you kind of see these different ways of playing.
Yeah, you can see this coming in, but the internal communication is a really great point. A company that has understood that from the very beginning, that your employees really matter, has been Southwest Airlines. Unfortunately, the founder, Herb, he's passed away, but he really kind of believed in doing a lot with the employees. And one of the ways they do that is their social media. They identify employees to write for their social media platforms. And so when they lay out their kind of calendar, like, okay, we're going to post Twitters this week. Here's what we're going to tweet. They will have what employees are responsible for certain content. And these are not the comm people. These are someone who handles baggage, someone who flies a plane, someone who's an attendant. They're coming in and they're giving that in part of their voice. And they understand that there's a great power to that because you want to see your voice within what's being done. A number of years ago, Southwest did a television show. You always want to pitch a reality show because, so it gets pitched to Southwest. Hey, we're going to show what life is like to work for Southwest. So they went to, I think, 2 or 3 airports in the U.S., and they filmed showing people handling belligerent customers, drunk customers, baggage complaints, that type of stuff. Really kind of mundane stuff. But it made for kind of interesting television if you kind of like that type of, if you like stuff about corporations. And they were asked to do a second season. I think they wound up doing 3. So their head of internal communications said, well, let me check with the employees. I want to see how the employees feel about this. So she goes out and she asks the employees, how do you feel about this show? The overwhelming response was they loved it. They said, now people understand what we put up with. All right? They can see what our job is like and how tough our job often is. Sometimes you just get these news reports about, like the mean person at the counter made someone miss their flight and they were trying to make their wedding or whatever type of thing. So now you get to see what it's like. And so that's why they said, yeah, we signed right back up after we was like, whoa, the employees really liked it. And now, again, their voices were coming out. These were their stories. The guy who's saying, well, I want you to, my bag is worth $1,000. You need to pay me $1,000 for my bag. And they're like, did you read your ticket? We're up to, we only cover up to, like a couple $100. And this guy's demanding that I'm just sitting there watching going like, why are you buying a $1,000 bag if you can't risk losing it? I thought if you buy a $1,000 bag, you're willing to just let it go. It's like, I thought that was, but of course the customer relations person can't say that, but that's what I'm thinking. And so yeah, I think that's a real good example that Southwest brings voices in, and I think that gets because we talk also a lot now, the trends about how do we get employees engaged? Well, let them be part of what you're talking about. Let their voices come out. Why does it always have to be the corporations here? I mean, the closest thing we used to get was in the old days was the newsletter, and there was a story about somebody. Well, let them create social media content. Let them do something like that. And companies, I think, are oftentimes overly restrictive in their policies on what they say employees can and cannot do on social media. I mean, most of your employees, they want to work for you. They're going to do some positive stuff, and there's some negative stuff in there. Yeah, that happens, but yeah, I think that's a really interesting route to go. So I think it engages them in a way that's meaningful to the employees. Because some engagement things, like organizations, this is a great idea. As employees, like, this is just another load of crap, man. It's another meeting I got to go to. You're wasting my time. I could be driving home, but this one I think is more meaningful. Oh, okay.
Okay, we have an online question from Michelle. What are best practices for developing a canon? My project is complex and nonlinear and has a top-down, from the middle, and bottom-up models on multiple platforms. She goes on to say that she's developed a toolkit for her top-down model, but hoped to do a multi-model handbook. Perhaps the canon could be developed for this handbook.
Wow, yeah, that's challenging to kind of think about that. I think that's where you kind of have to go back, and it's not necessarily, I think with transmedia, it's hard to kind of really pin down best practices, because it's going to be a more general focus, but to really come up with what is your story arc going to be, and then how can I build things around it, because I have a lot of stuff going on, a lot of moving pieces. I want to be able to integrate them around that story arc. So that needs to be my anchor, so I can see and how things go in and around that story. I think that needs to be the starting point, and the closest thing to best practice would be have my story arc in place. I know, and also know where that story arc fits into your organization? What do we gain from that as an organization as people enter in and are part of that story arc? What does that provide for my organization?
Thank you very much. I'm interested in knowing in which stage of the communication process for a new company that doesn't have this type of transmedia is better to start applying different platforms to engage with different stakeholders.
Yeah, for a new company, I say the sooner the better. I mean, that way you can start, because you're going to have at your heart, you're going to have your narrative of who we are and what we are. Because every company has that, who we are. Well, sometimes that's interesting, but a lot of times it's not. Start off that interesting. That should be the foundation of your story arc, and then you can have sub-arcs coming off of that, and start talking about what is your story, and invite people into that story. Do you want to be part of our story? And how can they be part of their story? So I think starting from the beginning, thinking how are we going to go about bringing people into our story with that main focus for it. 'Cause I've seen sometimes it's just a throwaway for a company, the who we are stuff, and that could be really powerful for them, because that's your chance to tell you who we are in a nice story. And then you can start building off of that other ways, kind of coming back to the story. It's kind of, because when we think about communication, we can think largely strategically about, okay, what are our larger organizational objectives, and what stories might fit around those that we can help bring people in. Knowing that we can't do that for every one of them, but for many of them, we can start thinking about how to do that. But I would do it at the very start. Let them know that you are a narrative company, or you're storytellers.
Yeah, because some companies may prefer one channel to engage.
Yeah.
But as you said, these platforms can open the doors to other stakeholders. So it's useful for a communications officer to show the benefits of these type of platforms.
Yeah, as long as you know that there are stakeholders you want on that platform, it's good to use it, because you don't want to be in a platform like, if you're targeting people 60 and above and you're on Snapchat, like, why? It's like, that doesn't make much sense. But if you know that they're out there, because these channels, it gets complicated, you got to start juggling them, but there's, again, different entry points, way to bring people in and do that. Because while they are fragmented, platforms are not distinct, because people can see across platforms. And that's a mistake I've seen some people make. They're like, well, I'm going to tell them one thing on this platform, I'm going to tell them another thing on this platform. Oh, no, because pretty soon someone's going to link those up and expose you on both platforms, all right? So that's why you got to kind of think of this consistency issue across them. I think, again, fragmentation does not mean distinction, because you're acting like, okay, well, this person only ever uses Facebook. Like, okay, well, maybe that person only uses Facebook, but they're going to hear from someone on Twitter, or there's going to be some report on social media that they see and they report on. I sometimes cringe. I'm like, well, I can say this and that. And like, whoa, yeah. Good luck with that.
Hello? Hi, Dr. Coombs. I also wanted to talk to you about the engagements part that you discussed, and we also discussed that it might turn bad.
Yeah.
So is there any parameters for when we know that the engagements part is when we predict that the engagements part can turn bad and now we need to readjust our message? Are there any parameters for those?
There's... First of all, if your company has done something your stakeholders didn't like in the past month or so, no, it's going to go that direction. I mean, it's amazing. Qantas ran a Twitter campaign right after a strike that it was believed really was caused by management that stranded tens of thousands of people around the globe. All right? How did they not know that was going to go bad? The best example, British Gas, on the day it announced a massive price hike, had a live Twitter conversation with one of its executives. Now, if you're that executive, you got to know going in, this is going to be ugly because we just announced this massive hike. And people just ooh, they were real. I mean, not foul, but vicious, and kind of rightfully so. So you got to know if I got something to pass. And I still don't, people like hammered, like, why did British Gas do that? It's like, well, in a way, they kind of got it out of the way, all right? All right, here, take your shot at us, all right? You've got it, that's part of it. I think we too narrowly define engagement as positive. All right, I do something and I get all this negative engagement. I still engage people, all right? And I should learn from that. There's something in those messages. I mean, these aren't just people trolling me, but these are people saying, we're upset about you, and I can learn from that. The other way is you kind of just monitor your sentiment analysis, how it's going for you. And you can see if it's trending negatively or favorably for you. And you just can't view those as failures. I don't like it when they say, okay, well, like, what was it? Tesco did this one. And a lot of people started saying, like, oh, well, I can't afford to shop at Tesco. And you're like, yeah, you're the rich elite type organization. Oh, okay, so maybe they are. And it's like, okay, well, just, yeah, that's kind of reinforces it for you. But you kind of learn from what's going on in that. And because we've recently written some stuff about engagement, and it's about that idea that, yeah, embrace the negative engagement that comes in. But yeah, you should be able to anticipate it. If I've had a bad spell, I know it's going to be bad coming in, and maybe that's a way for me to kind of get it out and get a discussion. At least I think that, in an era where we keep saying organizations need to be transparent, I thought British Gas was incredibly transparent. Because there was, for the whole world to see, we've just increased prices, and now we are being savaged in social media because our customers dislike it. All right, well, that's the way things are. But the other one would be, again, just to monitor to see where it's going. And then, again, learn from that. Is there... Social media data is all about trends, and that's why they keep telling you the future, and for some companies the future is now, it's the use of AI, because AI can recognize patterns. I'm looking for patterns. If there's a pattern in that negativity, well, let's use that. Maybe then we need to adjust how we're presenting the material and go in that direction, and let's talk about that negative. So if I'm running a CSR effort, and I see this pattern of criticism about how I'm missing something, all right, well, let's integrate that missing thing in, all right? Because you've been talking about this, let's bring this in. So let's change the story a little bit. Because we're probably still going to have this larger thing about kind of CSR and what we do and how we help people, but this is how you want us to help them, not the way we say we want to help them, but this way to help them. If you can weave it into your story arc, you can bring it back. And that's the beauty of story arcs. Is story arcs, much like values, are very broad, and you can reshape and you can move things to get them back to it. I mean, that's the. We often think of organizational culture as very constricting, but at its heart, organizational culture has a lot of values, and values are very elastic. And you can. So I think oftentimes when companies do changes, they want to make a big deal that they're different. And what that does is employees hear, ooh, this is going to be bad. As opposed to if you say, okay, we're going to make these changes. This is what we've been doing. We're just going to do it a little bit differently. And if you're an employer, like, okay, that doesn't sound like I'm going to get fired, or it doesn't sound like I'm going to have a lot of retraining to do, versus we are going to revolutionize. But I mean, companies, there's this weird tension, and some of the business people have been writing about that, of trying to hype your change versus just doing your change. And I think sometimes companies scare their own employees because they want to say, "Oh, we're so revolutionary." No, you're not really. It's like,